Before the story begins, I want you to imagine walking through the house you grew up in. Every corner feels familiar. The smell of old wood, the way the floor creaks beneath your feet, the warmth that should make you feel safe. But what if, behind those walls, something watched you? Something that waited? This isn't just a story. It's a truth buried in silence. So, take a deep breath. Because once you know
It
what
was
really
winter the
happened
night
in
that
everything
house
cracked open.
You'll never
The
look
house
at your
had that
own
same
quiet
quiet
hum.
again. It always did after midnight, the kind that sounds almost like breathing. I remember sitting at the edge of my bed, my fingers tracing the old wallpaper, the pattern of faded flowers that had watched me grow up and wither at the same time. I could hear the pipes moaning, the floorboards groaning under their own age. But what I the couldn't whisper hear behind anymore, the door, what I had the trained steps myself that stopped not to just hear outside was him. my room. That house was built in 1978, the same year my father returned from the Navy. He used to say the walls were strong, made of real wood, not the cheap plaster people use now. He said they could hold secrets. I never understood what he meant until I realized those walls had been holding mine all along. It started when I was 7.
He snored too
My
loud,
mother had already
but I knew
stopped
it wasn't
sleeping
the truth.
in the same
She
room
slept with her
as
door
my
locked.
father, even during the day. Sometimes I'd see her staring at the hallway, her face pale, her hands trembling around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. When I asked what was wrong, she'd say, "Nothing, baby. The house is just old." But it wasn't the house that was old. It was him. Or maybe it was the evil in him. I learned to
that
measure
aged
danger
everything
by
it
sound
touched.
the way
Years
the floor
went
creaked
by
outside
in
my
silence.
door. The shift in the air when he walked past my room. Every night, I'd count dot 1, dot 2, dot 3, dot 4. The rhythm of his steps, like a cruel lullaby. If he stopped at my door, I'd hold my breath until my vision blurred. Sometimes he'd stay there, standing, for what felt like hours. Then I'd hear the slow click of him when I turning the
15.
doorknob. I thought I was
Just
strong
testing.
enough to face him. I wasn't. That night, when he came home smelling of whiskey and guilt, I tried to stop him from going upstairs. I said things I shouldn't have said. I called him a monster. He smiled, and I swear to God, that smile was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It wasn't rage. It was delight. Like he'd been waiting years for me to challenge him. My mother said
The next
it was
morning,
from a cut on
there
her
was
hand,
blood on the kitchen
but she
floor.
wouldn't look me in the eye. I knew it wasn't her blood. I knew it wasn't mine either. And that terrified me more than anything because it meant someone else had been in that house. Someone I didn't know. For years, we lived like that. My mother silent, my father pretending everything was fine. Family dinners where nobody spoke. Holidays that felt like funerals. I started
And me
to feel
trapped
the
in
walls
that house.
closing in, guarding
Literally,
a secret
the
that grew
wallpaper
heavier by the
began
day,
peeling,
revealing dark stains underneath. I could smell something metallic, something old. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But one night, I pressed my ear to the wall and I heard something behind it. A sound like scraping. A soft, rhythmic tap. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. I started writing everything
My mother
down.
begged me
Dates,
to stop.
noises,
Said it would
smells,
only make
even
things
dreams.
worse.
It
But
became
by
an
then,
obsession. I needed to know. I needed proof that I wasn't insane. The breaking point came in August of 2009. The heat was unbearable, and the smell in the hallway had gotten stronger. My father was away for the weekend at least. That's what he told us. I decided to look behind the wall. I took a hammer, waited until the house was completely silent, like
and
it
hit
had
the
been
spot
waiting to
where
give
I'd
way.
heard the scraping.
And then there it was, a small cavity. The smell hit me first. Rot. Moisture. Time. Inside, wrapped in something that looked like an old bedsheet, was a box. A metal box, rusted and dented. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some of me, sleeping. Some of my mother,
The
crying.
sound bounced
Some
off
of
the
people
walls,
I didn't
filled
recognize.
every
Faces
corner
pale,
of that cursed house.
eyes empty. My mother
Some
came
of
running.
them
Saw
children.
what
I
I'd
dropped
found
the box
and fell to her
screamed.
knees. She didn't speak for a long time, just stared. Then she whispered, "He told me they were gone. He said it was over." That was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped being afraid of the dark because I realized the real darkness lived in daylight. Inside
But when they
arrived,
we trust
the box
most.
was gone.
I called
my
the
father
police the
too,
next morning.
and from that day on, I understood the meaning of silence. It wasn't peace. It was a warning. The morning after he vanished, the house felt hollow, like something had been ripped out of its core. The police were still there, walking through rooms that had once been mine, snapping photos, whispering in corners. They asked questions I couldn't answer. When was the last time you saw him? Did he ever act strange? Did anyone visit? Strange? He was strange, but not in a way you could explain on paper. How do you tell a detective that your father's presence made the air too heavy to breathe? That his shadow lingered longer than his body? That even when he wasn't home, you felt watched like the house itself had eyes? They didn't find
Just
the
the
box.
hole in the
They
wall
didn't find
and a
him
faint,
either. Unbearable smell that made everyone cover their noses. After they left, the silence returned thicker this time, as if the walls were listening again. My mother barely spoke. She just cleaned every day, every surface, scrubbing the floors until her hands bled. It was like she believed if she could erase the stains, she could erase the truth. I watched
Until
her
one
fade.
Morning,
Day
a
by
letter
day,
arrived,
into
no
a
stamp,
ghost of herself.
no return
Weeks
address,
passed,
just
no
our
calls,
names,
mine
no
and
trace.
hers written in his handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. Me, as a child, sitting on the porch, barefoot, holding a red balloon. On the back, in blue ink, it said, "You shouldn't have looked. I dropped it like it burned." My mother snatched it tore it to pieces, and threw it
That
into
was
the
moment
fireplace.
I realized
the flames
she
devoured
knew
it
more
in
than she
seconds.
ever told
But
me.
the words
I
started
started
digging
digging
in my
this
head.
time, not
You
through
shouldn't
walls,
have looked, but through memories. I went through his old drawers, the basement, the shed behind the house. In a box under the workbench, I found a receipt from 1993, an address to towns over, paid cash, no description. The handwriting was his. Something inside me whispered, "Go there." When I told
You
my
don't
mother,
understand
she begged
what
me
you're
not
waking
to.
up.
Her voice
But
cracked.
I couldn't
Please,
stop.
I
Just
needed
let it go,
answers.
she
I
said.
needed to know who those people in the photos were. The address led to an abandoned farmhouse on Route 17. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The front door was padlocked, but the side window was broken. I crawled in, heart pounding. Dust covered everything, thick as snow. The smell hit me instantly,
Labeled
damp
with
wood,
dates,
mold,
each one sealed
something
tight.
sour.
I
And then
opened
I
one.
saw them.
Inside were
Boxes,
personal items,
dozens of them,
bracelets,
hair clips, a small shoe. Another box, more objects. A child's backpack, a hospital wristband. My stomach turned. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Then, behind one of the crates, I found a journal. His handwriting again. Pages and pages of notes, names, times, I
short
dropped
entries
the
like
notebook
too loud,
and ran outside.
didn't scream,
Gasping
buried
for
near
air.
creek.
The sunlight
couldn't
felt
breathe.
unreal, too bright, too clean for what I'd just seen. I called the police from a payphone because I didn't want the call traced back to me. When they arrived hours later, the place had been burned to the ground. They said it was arson. No suspects, no evidence left. I started to think I was losing my mind. How could he always be one step ahead, even when he was gone? That night, when I got home, the house was dark except for the light coming from my room. I froze at the door. Inside, the lamp was on, my window open, and on my bed another photograph. This time it was recent, taken that day. I was standing in front of the farmhouse, and on the back, again in blue ink, it was still here. That was the moment I realized the horror breathing
hadn't left
through the
with
walls.
him.
Over the next months, everything fell apart. My mother stopped eating, stopped talking. The neighbors whispered. The police gave up. But I couldn't. I spent nights in the attic, listening to the house creak, reading his old notes over and over, trying to find something, anything that made sense. Then, one night in December,
It wasn't my mother's name.
It wasn't
in the
anyone
corner
I
of
knew.
one
But
page,
beside it,
underlined
in
twice,
parentheses,
Eleanor.
he had written, "She knows." That was the clue that changed everything. I thought the nightmare was ending. I didn't know it was only just beginning. The name haunted me for days. Eleanor. It echoed in my mind like a half-remembered song, familiar but impossible to place. I searched everywhere, old letters, until one
family
afternoon,
albums,
while
phone
going
records,
through a
but
box
nothing.
of my mother's things, I found a folded piece of paper tucked inside a Bible she kept on her nightstand. It was a photograph, old and yellowed, showing my parents standing in front of the house, smiling stiffly. Beside them was a woman with dark hair and a piercing stare. On the back, written in the same blue ink, it said simply, Eleanor minus
For a moment, she froze,
1,985.
her eyes
My
going
mother
wide,
walked in,
her
as I
lips
was
parting
holding like
it.
she'd seen a ghost. Then she snatched the picture from my hand and said, almost in a whisper, "Don't bring her into this, please." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she left the room before I could ask anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt wrong again. Every sound had a meaning, the ticking clock. It was the sound of someone moving, the creak of a board
I
near
held
the
my
hallway.
breath
I
and
knew
waited
that sound too
nothing.
well, just silence. But I could feel it, someone was there watching. The next morning, I found muddy footprints near the back door, small ones, women's shoes. My mother swore she hadn't gone outside. I believed her. I decided to find Eleanor myself. I went to the library, searched through public records, phone directories. Born in 1959,
I could get my
last
hands
known
on.
address.
Finally,
a small
I found
town
her name,
2 hours
Eleanor
away.
Graves.
The drive there felt endless. The road cut through miles of empty fields, gray skies hanging low like they wanted to crush everything beneath them. When I reached the town, I found her house easily. It was the only one with its curtains always closed. I knocked once, twice. No answer. But just as I was about to turn away, if I wanted her to know my name yet.
Who
I'm
are you?
looking for
A voice
someone.
asked
My
from the
father.
shadows.
I
My
think
name
you knew
is-
him.
I
William
stopped.
Hart. The door opened wider. She stepped into the light, her face older than in the photo, lined by years of sleeplessness. Her eyes studied me for a long moment before she whispered, "You're his son." The way she said it, it wasn't surprise. It was pity. She let me in. The house smelled of dust. The walls were
old
covered
coffee.
with newspaper clippings, photographs, police sketches. My father's face stared back at me from half of them. "I tried to warn your mother," she said, "but she didn't want to hear it. Nobody ever wants to hear the truth until it's too late." I felt my throat tighten. What truth? Eleanor looked at me then, truly looked, as if measuring how much I could bear. "He wasn't always like that," she said. "But when I met broke in him, he was
after
different.
the accident.
Kind, after
even.
the girl." I frowned. "What girl?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward a locked drawer in her desk. "You should leave it buried," she said. "Your mother made her choice. Don't make the same mistake." But I couldn't stop. I pressed her, begged her. Finally, she unlocked the drawer and handed me a single photograph. A girl, no older than 12, smiling
was your
shyly
sister,
at the camera.
Eleanor
On
whispered,
the back, "Your father's first
1983,
child,
Sarah."
before your mother." The words didn't make sense. "That's not possible," I said. "My father never." "He did," she interrupted softly. "And when she died, he lost himself. He couldn't forgive the world. He started collecting the ones he thought could replace her. the ones who looked like her. I felt the room spin, the walls, the
She
air,
just looked
everything
at me
with that unbearable pity again.
Eleanor didn't
The truth
argue.
doesn't need you to believe it, she said. It just waits. I left her house shaking, the photo clutched in my hand. I didn't want to believe her, but the face of the girl, the tilt of her head, the shape of her eyes, it was like looking into a distorted version of myself. When I got home, my mother was waiting at the window. She must have seen my car from afar.
You shouldn't
because
have gone.
she was already
I demanded
crying.
to know
You
who
went
Sarah
to her,
was,
she
my
said.
mother
Mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing. He told me she ran away, she said. He told me she was gone before we met. I believed him. God help me. I believed him. That night, I found her burning papers in the sink letters, photographs, anything that could prove what Eleanor had told me. When I tried to stop her, she turned on me.
You have no
her
idea
face twisted
what
in
we
a way
did to
I'd
keep you
never
safe.
seen before. Her
You
words
think you
froze
know
me.
the
Dot
truth.
we dot not
She
he
screamed.
dot we. Something inside me broke. All those years I'd thought of her as a victim. Maybe she was, but maybe she was something else too, an accomplice, bound by fear and guilt. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the wall where it all started, staring at the faint outline of the hole I'd made. I thought about the boxes,
And I realized
the horror didn't end with
the
him.
names.
It spread, quiet and patient, through everyone who stayed silent. That's when I decided, if no one would tell the truth, I would, even if it destroyed us all. The first time I tried to tell someone, they laughed. A reporter from a local newspaper came to the house after I sent an anonymous email. I told her everything about the photographs, the boxes, the journals. Took notes. The girl nodded
named
politely,
Sarah.
then asked if I'd ever sought help for my trauma. The moment I saw the pity in her eyes, I knew what she really thought. That I was another broken kid trying to rewrite my own pain into something extraordinary. She never published the story. After that, word spread fast. The neighbors stopped looking me in the eye. The cashier at the gas station hesitated before handing
They
me
said
change.
I was sick.
People whispered.
That grief
had
had
twisted
the boy
my
who
mind.
said his
But
father
the worst
was a
part
murderer.
wasn't the strangers. It was my mother. She started acting like nothing had happened. She cleaned, cooked, even hummed while she worked, like she was trying to rebuild the illusion brick by brick. Whenever I mentioned my father, she'd smile weakly and say, "You need to let him rest. Rest." As if monsters ever rested. By early 2010,
I
spent nights in
I
the
was
attic,
living half in
piecing
shadows.
together timelines, rereading the fragments of my father's journal that I'd managed to save before my mother burned the rest. Some entries were mundane lists of tools, times, dates, but others, February 17th, she moved again in her sleep. March 2nd, couldn't bury near creek. Ground still frozen. April 10th, mother said it's better this way. My grandmother,
That last line
the one
stopped
who
me
lived
cold.
in that mother
house
said
before
it's better
I was
this
born.
way. The
He
one
hadn't meant my
everyone
mother.
said died
He'd meant
peacefully
his.
in her sleep. I started to wonder how much of the rot went back generations. Then, in June, something happened that tore open everything again. A construction crew digging near the old creek bed found bones. Human bones, small ones. The police cordoned off the area. And suddenly, my family's name that was on everyone's lips again meant something else. Something whispered. They questioned my mother again. She cried, said she didn't know anything, said my father was a good man, said I'd been unstable since childhood. I listened from the hallway as she told them what to believe. She even produced a letter apparently written by my father years before saying he'd left us, that he was ashamed, that he'd never come back that night. But I recognized the handwriting. She didn't deny it. Wasn't his. I did what I had to, she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand what people can do when the world starts watching. I shouted, called her a liar, a coward. She slapped me so hard I saw white. Then she broke down, sobbing, and whispered something I'll never forget. I was pregnant when I found out about the others, she said. I wanted to leave, what hurt more, but he said he'd take you with him. He said no one would ever find chosen you. To stay. The room tilted to protect me by pretending none of it happened. But lies rot everything they touch. Over the next weeks, reporters swarmed. The story broke nationwide after someone leaked the police report. The Hart House murders, they called it. They said my father might be connected to 7 disappearances spanning more than 2 decades. The house became a circus police tape, flashing lights, curious onlookers snapping photos through the fence. I thought I'd feel relief, but all I felt was guilt, because as they searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that the horror wasn't buried under the ground. It was still alive, breathing through me. They tore up the floors, ripped down the walls, and one afternoon, I stood there watching as an officer pried open behind the false wall of the basement. They found a small room, no windows, just a mattress on the floor. Chains bolted to the concrete. A mirror. The air was thick with mold and something else, something metallic, like rust and memory. I remember stepping closer, feeling my stomach twist. On the wall, scratched faintly into the plaster, were the words, I forgive you, Sarah. For a long time, a confession, move. Maybe, I just stared at those words. The news knowing they like didn't belong to the TV victims. Crews, they belonged outside. To him. Reporters shouted questions through the gate. Do you believe your father was guilty? Did you know what he was doing? I didn't answer. I just closed the door and watched the house turn into a similar horror story for everyone else to consume. But for me, it wasn't a story. It was home. That night, I lit a candle, went out, and sat in darkness, the kitchen, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. Then I heard it a soft creak from upstairs. The same one I'd heard as a child. Slow, steady, closer. My breath caught. The candle flickered, and then I heard it just above me. The faintest whisper, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Why did you tell them? I froze. My heart thrashed against my ribs. When I finally found the courage to look up, it means there you feel nothing. It too. Just the sound of the rain. Chill. That whisper in the dark that says something isn't right. Don't look away now. What happens next will change everything you thought you knew about safety, about home, about trust. Stay with me, because the moment the world discovered what was hidden there was the moment everything fell apart. But I knew I wasn't alone. After the because voice, some ghosts I don't haunt places in that they house haunt alone. Blood. I moved to a rented room above an auto repair shop on the edge of town. Concrete walls, no creaks, no memories. I told myself the silence there would be different, clean, mechanical, harmless. But silence has a way of following you when it wants to be heard. The first week, I barely slept. Every night I dreamed of footsteps that stopped just wake outside up my door. In sweat. My heart hammering so loud before I felt like someone knocking from the inside. The news cycle had already moved on. Hot case cold. The headlines said people wanted new monsters, but the police still called sometimes, not to ask about evidence, just to check in. Their voices were polite, cautious, the way people talk to someone they think might break. Then, one evening in late February, was a photograph. A letter slid under my door. The same angle return the investigators had used postmark for the papers. But this photo was different. There was someone standing in the corner, a shadow shaped like my father. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I knew it couldn't be real. The room had been sealed. The house was still under watch. Still, when I turned off the lights that night, every noise from the shop below, I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into work, sounded like a voice endless calling online searches, message boards where strangers argued about whether my father had been framed, whether I had inherited his sickness. Some users claimed to have seen him in gas stations, in motels, on security footage blurred by rain. I told myself they were trolls, but each sighting had one detail in common. He was always carrying a red balloon. Every morning, it was ridiculous. When I left my room, I half expected to see one floating near the curb. A month later, the shop owner asked me to clear out the attic for storage. I hadn't been up there before. The air was thick with dust, sunlight slicing through the cracks in the roof. I moved boxes aside, one after another, until I saw something scrawled on the wall in charcoal. "You're telling it wrong." I called everything. The police. The handwriting looked around, deliberate, shrugged. Could be just an like old tenant, one said. Could be you, sleepwalking. The second part stung more than it should have. I didn't argue. They left. That night, I took a photo of the writing with my phone, just to prove to myself it was real. But when I checked the image, the words were gone, just a blank wall. That's when the dreams started to bleed into waking hours. I'd hear whispers through static. Once, when the radio turned with dirt under my nails and no memory of leaving my bed. I began to wonder if the horror had ever been in the house at all, or if it had always been in me. One evening, I went back to the creek where they'd found the bones. The police tape was gone now. The water ran smooth and quiet. I sat there until dusk, listening to frogs. Then I saw the distant
across
hum
the
of the
water,
highway.
half
For a
hidden
moment,
by reeds,
I felt
stood a
almost
figure,
human
tall,
again, still wearing a pale coat. The light was fading, but I could swear the face was his, older, thinner, eyes fixed on me. I didn't move, neither did he. When I blinked, he was gone. I ran home and locked every door, every window. I told myself I'd imagined it, that grief could sculpt ghosts out of shadows. But deep down, I knew the truth. Even if he was dead, something of him had survived, not in the world, but in me. The next morning, another envelope waited outside my door. Inside was a single sentence written in blue ink. You can't bury what you are. I sat on the floor for a long time, the words burning into me, realizing that the horror I'd spent my life trying to expose might be the
Not
very
really,
thing that because the
defined
real
me.
discovery
And in that
was still
moment,
coming.
I
I stopped
understood.
answering the phone.
world hadn't
Every
discovered
ring
the horror
sounded like
yet.
a warning, a reminder that the world outside was still watching. The reporters were gone. The police had moved on. But sometimes I'd see a car parked too long across the street, headlights off, engine running. The curtains in my room stayed closed, day and night. I told myself it was safety. Maybe it was isolation. Maybe they're the same thing. But silence tried to build routines, feel like breathing underwater possible, yet unbearable. I could almost sense the house listening to me again, though this time it wasn't that house. This one was newer, cleaner, with white walls and a scent of paint. Still, when the wind passed through the cracks, it made the same low moan the old pipes used to make. The same
Just
heartbeat
the same
beneath
sudden
the
jolt, the
floorboards.
feeling that
Every
someone
night
had
at
said
3
my
a.m.
name.
Once I woke up, I heard it
no
clearly,
alarm,
right
no
next
reason.
to my ear. A whisper. Eli. No one called me that except him. I started recording the nights. I set my phone on the nightstand, voice memo running until dawn. The next morning, I'd play it back and listen. Hours of stillness, then clicks, breathing. Once, faint laughter. I wanted to believe, but the moment I heard that laugh soft, a trick satisfied, like someone remembering the way he used to laugh. When something broke, I turned it off and threw the phone across the room. Days blurred. My reflection started to look like someone I didn't know. My eyes were sunken, my skin pale from the lack of sunlight. I stopped recognizing my own handwriting in the notes I left for myself. Sometimes the letters slanted the kind like of his. Thick, then
dark
one morning
soil
from the creek, I woke to find window was on my
open.
shoes. My sheets smelled of rain. I didn't remember leaving. I told myself I was sleepwalking, but that didn't explain the small cut on my wrist or the faint bruise shaped like a hand on my shoulder. I tried to convince myself it was all exhaustion, that trauma was just replaying itself through my body. But when I found the footprints wet, muddy, leading from the window to the bed,
I went to see
and
Eleanor.
stopping right where I slept,
I
to her
couldn't breathe
since the last time. But I needed to know if she still felt it too, if the past could keep reaching out. Her house was quieter than before. Dust lay thick on everything, the air stale. I called her name, but got no answer. Then I saw the newspaper on the table, dated 2 weeks earlier. The obituary section was open. Her photo was there. She had died in her sleep for a long
deliberate
moment.
sound.
The world went
like
very
footsteps
still.
fading
I
away.
couldn't move. As I turned to leave, I noticed a note taped to the back of her door. In that same careful handwriting. It doesn't stop with death. It only changes its voice. The ride home felt endless. The radio crackled with static. And in the static, I thought I heard her whisper my name. That night, I dreamed
My
of the
father
old house
stood at
again,
the end
the
of the
walls
hallway,
breathing,
the
holding something
wallpaper
behind
pulsing
his
like
back.
skin.
He smiled the same calm, distant smile he'd worn in every photo. "It's your turn," he said. I woke gasping, my hands covered in dust, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst. The phone beside me buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. Silence. The next morning, I found another
my
envelope
own voice
outside my door.
recorded,
No writing,
saying,
just
"It's your
a faint
turn."
red stain
The
on
call
one
ended.
corner. Inside was a photograph of me sleeping, taken from inside my room. That was when I understood. The horror wasn't in the walls. It wasn't even in my father's legacy. It was inside the silence itself, inside the spaces we leave unspoken, where guilt and blood and memory live on. And every night, I went to bed expecting not dreams,
never forgets how
but
to
fragments moments. Sleep had
that
stopped
didn't
being
belong
a
to
refuge. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, sheets twisted around my legs, bruises on arms I couldn't explain. At first, I blamed exhaustion, paranoia, or the echoes of old trauma. But the moments became patterns. Objects moved, doors unlocked, footsteps in the hallway. When I was certain I was
write
alone,
the date,
I began
hour,
marking the
the
days
events I
in a
remembered,
journal. And
time
then
had
I'd leave
become
a blank
untrustworthy.
space where I knew I had been awake, but could recall nothing. Hours I didn't own. Hours where something had been living through me. One night, I set up a camera across my room, hoping to catch whatever had been visiting. The next morning, I didn't remember setting it up. My hands were sticky with dust. My shoes caked with mud from the creek. I saw myself play
someone
for nearly
who
3
looked
hours.
exactly like
The
me,
footage was moving
empty.
through the room, methodical, calm, placing a red balloon on the chair in the corner. My own eyes stared back at me from the recording, wide and blank, as though I were watching a stranger. I tried to scream. My voice cracked, echoing in the small room. I ran to the mirror, hoping it would explain something. The reflection was me, but
Familiar,
not me. The
yet
eyes were
distant.
cold, like I was both inside and outside my own body. I realized then what Eleanor had meant. The horror didn't need a body. It didn't need a house. It didn't even need a father. It was inside me. The things I'd seen. The things I'd remembered. The hours I had no memory of, they had all been mine. Yet not mine. The days blurred further. I stopped eating regularly. I stopped answering calls. I'd hear my the wind own voice echoing back from the walls, building, repeating it phrases sounded like whispers. I didn't remember saying. It's your turn. I confronted my mother again, hoping for guidance. She stared at me, her eyes hollow. You don't understand, she said. He left you everything. The house, the boxes, the memories. You carry it now. Don't let it go, or it will disappear like he did. I didn't understand them to the creek. I still don't. Where the bones had been found. The whispers the water was black, reflecting the moon in jagged shards. I knelt on the bank, looking for some evidence, some sign that what I was feeling was real. Then I saw a balloon red, floating just above the water. I reached for it. When my fingers brushed it, I felt something inside me shift, like a door opening. Memories I had blocked, fragments of events I had forgotten, came rushing back. Nights when I had moved silently through the house, arranging things, whispering, hiding. Hours where I had been awake, but entirely someone else, someone my father had trained me to be without knowing. Or maybe someone the horror itself had made me become. I staggered back from the creek, my knees hitting the mud. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. That made my skull ache. The world didn't discover the horror. The horror had always been inside me. I was the last container, the final vessel, and now it was awake. Days and nights bled together. I no longer knew which was which, and the outside world had become a dim hum behind the walls of my mind. I couldn't leave the apartment for long without feeling a pull, an invisible thread dragging me back to the creek, to the house, to moments I couldn't remember but knew. Every reflective surface became a challenge. Mirrors, windows, even the black screen of my phone seemed to hold eyes that weren't mine. I began leaving notes for myself, but when I returned, they had changed. Words scratched over words, phrases my handwriting felt foreign, as though someone else had stolen it from me and was using it to speak directly into my mind. Then came the night I saw myself in the mirror, not the reflection. The actual image. I froze. He, my father, the shadow, stood behind me, a figure so familiar and impossible. I could feel my own heartbeat echoing in its chest. Its mouth moved, whispering words. Will you bury it vibrating or let it breathe? I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. The figure leaned closer. I wanted to strike it, run from it, anything, but my body refused. I realized then that the horror wasn't in him. It wasn't in the walls, the boxes, the red balloons, or the creek. It was me. Every choice, every forgotten action. For weeks, I had watched the world move I had inherited. The newspapers replaced my father's name with new tragedies. The internet forget his crimes. I could expose everything, the names, the boxes, the creek, the journals, but even if I did, would anyone understand what I had become? Would they see the monster that lived in the blank spaces of my memory? In the hours I couldn't recall, in the echoes the of water was still that weren't mine, but the moon I went to the creek again in jagged light. The balloon floated above, tethered to nothing. I reached for it. My hands shook. I could feel the pull, the lure of surrender, of becoming fully the vessel, letting the horror flow freely into the world. And then I remembered Eleanor's words, faint and distant. It only changes its voice. I realized that hiding it had never worked. And now the world wanted it revealed inside me. Whether I willed learning my rhythm, I stood at the edge of the bank, the balloon at eye level, and made the choice. I would speak. I would write. I would show the world everything, even if it meant letting it consume me, because keeping it buried had only made it stronger. The first draft of the story sat on my desk the next morning, pages filled with names, dates, events, and confessions. I wrote it all down that weren't mine entirely, until my hands ached mine and my eyes burned. And when I finished, I read it aloud to the empty apartment, the echoes filling every corner, the walls drinking in the horror. I knew then that once it was released, it could never be contained again. Not in me, not in the world. And somewhere deep inside, a voice my own, but not whispered. Finally, instead, the story went live. I sat on the floor of the apartment, the notifications, knees drawn to my chest, couldn't bring myself to see the messages. Came the silence too heavy, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then the murmurs started. People called the hotline numbers listed in the news stories. They called police departments. They called friends, relatives, strangers who had lived near the creek. Messages flooded inboxes, emails, texts. Some wanted even proof. Handwritten letters. Others wanted vengeance under doors. All of them were afraid, angry. I couldn't tell anyone what I knew. The truth was no longer something that could be spoken safely, even as the news cycles ran headline after headline. The Hart House horror. What we didn't know. I realized that what had once been my father's secret was now ours, mine included. The horror I thought I had inherited, they came for interviews. No longer they wanted me on camera. It had explain into to the relive in the most literal sense. I sat in silence, watching the reporters scribble notes. Some of them whispered among themselves, glances sharp and skeptical, but the tremor in my hands betrayed me. I couldn't speak the words. I couldn't say, "It lives in me now, and it is patient, and it remembers everything." Even strangers
A mother
looked
in
at
the
me
grocery
differently.
store gripped
The
her
barista
child's
at
hand
the corner
tighter.
cafe
Neighbors
hesitated
whispered
before
as I
handing
walked
me
past.
my coffee. I was marked not for what I had done, but for what I carried, what I was still learning about myself. I returned to the creek at night. The water was calm, reflective like glass, but the memories surged. The red balloon, tethered to nothing, bobbed gently on the surface. I reached out, felt the string coil around my fingers, and realized something that had been true all along. The horror had never needed a house, a father, or a secret room. It needed witnesses. It needed acknowledgement. By morning, the apartment was empty. I had left a note for my mother, a simple line, "I cannot stay silent any longer." When she read it, I imagined her hands trembling. Imagine her understanding had begun in and earnest. Not people debated what was real. I didn't and wait what was find out. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, the fevered imaginings of a traumatized child who had grown into a man obsessed with shadows. Others believed everything: names, dates, photographs, the journals I had somehow preserved. I didn't care what they believed. What mattered was that the silence was broken. The truth, yet even as I watched the world had been unleashed, I felt a tremor of dread. The horror that had been patient, silent, and hidden for decades. What would it do now that it had been invited to exist in full daylight? Because I knew I had been its vessel long enough to understand. And somewhere inside, beyond the city, beyond the news, it was waking. And it was hungry for acknowledgement. Weeks passed. The world had begun to feel like a shallow river. Headlines moving faded, fast in social media threads disappeared under newer tragedies. Investigators closed files. But for me, nothing had ended. The horror I thought I had inherited hadn't left. It had changed shape. It no longer lurked in walls or shadows. It was memory. It was instinct. It was every breath I drew. I returned to the creek one last time. The red balloon was ran my fingers. The water reflected nothing, trying to find some final fragment and quiet, a token, a proof that any of it had been real. Nothing responded, and in that stillness, I realized something profound. Horror doesn't wait for proof. It doesn't ask for acknowledgement. It simply exists in the spaces we ignore, in the silence we cultivate. I went back to my apartment. It felt smaller now, the air heavier. Through the pages, I lit a candle, the confessions, and sat the fragments of memory I had written, and I understood the truth about myself. I wasn't innocent. I wasn't wholly guilty. I was a vessel, a participant in a lineage of secrecy and fear. And I had choices, even now. I could let it consume me, like my father, like the silence that had ruled our house. Or I could carry it differently, carefully, consciously. I would never forget to let the past define the entirety of my life. The sound of footsteps outside my room, the faces in the photographs, the girl named Sarah, the whispers that came from walls and shadows. but I could choose what to do with them. I lit another candle, letting its flame join the first. The room was quiet. For the first time in years, I felt something approaching peace, not because the horror was gone, but because I had faced naming it, writing it, walking through it. It had stripped away its power over me. And then I smiled faintly, a gesture almost foreign to me. Because while the world may never know the full weight of what happened, I did. And that, in its own way, was enough. The horror had been inherited. The world had seen it, feared it, whispered about it. But I had survived it. And in surviving, I had discovered the impossible truth, confronting the darkness, even when it lives inside you, can be the only way to reclaim your own voice. I set down my pen, closed the journal, and for the first time in decades, listened to the silence. It was no longer waiting. It was only quiet, and that, I realized, was a miracle.